I just think that they're the sorts of places where God wants his people, aren't they? I felt so close to God in those places because I genuinely so terrified. I never learned to pray like that. I learned how to pray in the spirit in those times. I learned how to cry out to God with every ounce of energy. Oftentimes you felt you had nothing left apart from crying out to God for mercy.
Welcome everybody, this is Inspired with Simon Gilbo, and I'm thrilled to have with me an old buddy this week. His name is Hankey. Welcome, Di.
Good to be with you, brother.
So you're a whole bunch of things, aren't you? You're a coffee roaster, you're an abolitionist, you're a church planter, and we're just going to get straight in with your story. So Di, obviously, well, you've only said hello, brother, but I think people can already tell you're from Wales. Go on, give us some background.
So, born and raised in a Welsh town called Pontypool in the Eastern Valley in South Wales. Born to two amazing Christian parents who did their best to raise me well, but didn't really go the path I should have gone for, the first 15 years of my life. But was always grateful for the home I grew up in. Had a very loving home and had a mother who was an incredible prayer warrior, whose faith inspired me even before I was a follower of Jesus myself, and whose grace is still ingrained in my life. Just the most incredible Christian I've ever known. And a dad who, very strict dad, also very loving dad, very present, and a real adventurer. He gave me a real love for taking risks and a real love for, not allowing your fears to inhibit you. So put those two things together. I think they're still perhaps the two most formative influences in my life. Grew up in South Wales, and at the age of 15, had a radical encounter with Jesus Christ that kind of completely changed the trajectory of my life, but never left South Wales. And so, that's a little bit about me, born again in Wales.
Right. And I picture you as a sort of skater, even though you're about, 45 now?
44, almost 45, yeah. And funnily enough, I kind of historically am a skateboarder, so I was a skateboarder for many, many years. Broke my body more times than I care to count, and I'm still suffering from the arthritis to this day. So, I've got multiple surgeries behind me, where I think I've had 3 operations on my left leg, all from skateboarding injuries. I'm currently looking at a skateboard on my wall as well, which has got the X-ray of a dislocated elbow that I actually dislocated on that skateboard, and my father made it into a picture frame to try and teach me a lesson. Was a skateboarder, stopped for 20 years, but my eldest son has just got into it now. So I am going out and just having a little shuffle around the skate parks with my son, although a lot slower and a lot more cautiously than I used to.
And are you holding back from saying, when I was a boy?
Oh, mate, do you know what? It is actually quite sad. Now I've got kids who are in high school. I sound like that anyway, even if I don't say when I was a boy. That could be like the kind of the banner over my life as a parent right now. It wasn't like that in my day.
That's right. Now, you said you had a radical conversion. Give us a bit of detail on that.
So, I'm sure you can relate. I'm sure many of your listeners can relate. But even by the age of 15, we can make a lot of mistakes and do a lot of things in our lives that we deeply regret. And I have strong memories, even from the age of about maybe 12, 13 years old. I'd done a lot of things that I knew because of the parenting that I had, I shouldn't have done. I got involved in a lot of, trouble. I was, going out into the streets, causing trouble with my friends. I was not treating girls well. I was doing my best to live a kind of a rebellious life. And that led to 2 very, very strong emotions. The first emotion that I had was shame. I live a life that was almost like plagued, haunted by shame and guilt. I was regularly left with my own thoughts, and the memory of things that I had done really troubled me. I didn't like some of the decisions that I'd made, but that kind of led to another very strong emotion, which was self-hatred. I really didn't like the person that I had become. And by the age of 15, I just didn't like myself. And I had a lot of anger that manifested itself in anger, physical outbursts, punching walls, getting involved in fights, speaking very unkindly to people, very disrespectful against authority, very anti-authoritarian, really, getting in trouble in school. I was just really, really angry. I think anger was the overall word I would say described my life at the age of 15, but that was complemented by lust, complemented by pride, complemented by just cruelty. I use such cutting words to hurt people and to wound people, not least my family. I remember robbing robbing Tesco's. Well, I remember robbing Sunday school. I also remember robbing Tesco's. I remember robbing my own mother's purse. I was just not a nice kid, and yet at the age of 15, full of rage, full of self-hatred, and just really not liking my life. This guy that I knew who went to the church youth club that I still went to when it was raining. When it wasn't raining, I'd be out in the streets. When it was raining, I'd go to this church youth club. And I remember this guy who was there. He said, "Oh, do you want to come on a camp in the summer?" And I was like, "Well, what's a camp?" I had no idea what he was talking about. He said, "You just go to North Wales and, you go and there's loads of sports, there's loads of, activities." I was like, "Well, we got the best leisure centre in the world in Pontypool. Why do I need to go to North Wales to do sports?" And then he said, "And there's girls." I said, "Oh, yeah, well, I'll go then, obviously." So I didn't go there having an existential crisis. I didn't go there looking for Jesus. I went there like just trying to, impress the ladies and to try and intimidate all the boys. That's pretty much what I was there to do. I remember on the Tuesday night of this camp, they had a camp photograph, and I remember flashing the anchors in this photograph, thinking it was really kind of. And to this day, there's a photograph of me in 1992 with my kind of with my V on the back of the chair, like trying to show everyone I was too hard to be in this.
You were that boy.
I was that boy.
So there's always hope, isn't there?
Well, that evening I got saved. That's the crazy part of the story, man. Like, so there was a faithful old gentleman who was preaching the gospel faithfully, not cool, not flashy, but just opened the Bible and showed us. Well, I remember clearly my overwhelming emotion was the problem with your life is sin, and the solution is Jesus. He died for you because he loves you. He rose again. Turn your back on that wretched way of life that's left you feeling the way you are and trust Jesus. I just remember sitting on a wall on that Tuesday night, crying my eyes out and saying, "I'm sorry, forgive me. My life is yours now if you want me." And it was a strange thing. As I've looked back on that time of crying, I think my tears were twofold. I think I was crying because I was genuinely remorseful for the sin in my life. I mean, I didn't need to be convinced I was a sinner. So I was just confronting it. I found that very emotional. I was also, I guess, grateful that forgiveness was even an offer. But it also felt, this might sound weird, but it felt like I was attending my own funeral. I felt like I was saying goodbye to my old life. I felt like when I stood up off that wall, I had a new life. And so I was almost like saying goodbye to 15 years of shame and 15 years of self-hatred. And as I prayed, it was like somebody took a big vacuum cleaner and just sucked all of the shame out of my life, almost like off my shoulders. And I almost felt light. I felt clean on the inside for the first time in my life as I believed with all my heart that Jesus died for my sins. And that is the single most formative moment in my life, the most impacting, the best moments, better than my marriage, better than the birth of any of my 4 children, better than any promotion, better than any praise or plaudit I've ever received. The day that Jesus gave me my life back.
And did you know then that you'd end up doing this sort of, I mean, I hate the word full time, but you know what I mean, going straight into gospel ministry?
No, I didn't. But this is one thing which did happen. So I just wanted to tell people about Jesus. It was just too good to keep to myself. And that was at the end of what is now known as year 10. I called it 4th year, but it was like year 10. And I had year 11 left in school. And one of the things I really struggled with that year is I really wanted to have the courage and the confidence to tell my friends about Jesus. But like, I just lacked that courage. I was still a baby Christian. A lot of those guys only knew me as the troublemaker. And I found it really hard to sort of like connect with them. But even so, my heart was to tell people. I remember like, I think within a year or two, I was going into like the local youth prison and sharing the gospel with like local inmates in the youth prison, and in my church youth club, I would just want to tell people, I'd want to teach, and because I mean, the only thing I think I'm actually good at in this world, I'm quite good at a lot of things, but the thing which I think God has gifted me with is I'm just gobby. I just like talking. I like opening my mouth, and I like the sound of my voice a bit too much. Which is which God has to like rein in. But I think I just realized that's why God made me gobby, so I can tell people about Jesus. And I think now it's not a surprise that's the path he took me on, but it was never part of the plan.
So after school, I mean, did you quit school when you were 16?
Went to a 6th form. I was given a choice. Where I grew up in my town, there was no 6th form. There's only a 6th form college. But whereas there was a good sixth form in a school 5 miles down the road. And I knew I had this really clear like moment where I just knew if I'd gone to the sixth form college with all my friends, I was never going to be able to sort of like break away from the
Yeah.
old stuff.
Hmm.
So, and it's still a decision I second guess, to this day, was that the right decision? But I went to this sixth form school with none of my friends came with me. Maybe one person who I knew, one or two people I knew. Everyone else went to the college. But it was just a fresh start that I needed. I did A levels, not that they were particularly helpful. I was told by my school quite early on that I wasn't academic enough to do a proper degree, and they encouraged me to aim low. It's classic Welsh encouragement. So I wanted to do a degree in history. They were like, "Don't bother, like you're never going to get those grades. Do something more vocational." So I did a degree in recreation and leisure.
Has that come in handy?
Well, I'm still coaching an under 10s football team to this day. So, I guess I can still coach children in sport and probably be more useful than history would have been, to be honest with you.
Sorry, all you historians out there, really valuable.
Yeah, I'm jealous, man. I wish I could have studied history. I love history, but I certainly wasn't. I was told I wasn't academic enough to achieve it.
And then you ended up in inner city Cardiff.
Yeah, so came to Cardiff to do the degree. And through my time in Cardiff, hooked up with a church called Highfields. And after I graduated, started working for them with like local kids on the streets, young offenders, kids at risk of offending, young addicts. Set up a drop-in centre for those guys. Went from there to East Cardiff, like a kind of a little big council estate on the eastern side of Cardiff called St. Mellons, and worked there for 6 years, where I met my wife as well, and started a family there in East Cardiff. That was the craziest place I've ever lived or worked, man. Like that estate was.
Go on, give me some crazy estate stories.
Oh, mate. I'll just give you one which always comes to mind. So, like, we were in a house which backed onto a park with a little playground. When we moved there, the playground was just a burnt out shell with just A-frames, no swings on the A-frames and nothing else in there. It was just cinders. And I remember like one afternoon, it would be about 2:00 in the afternoon on a school day, maybe even lunchtime on a school day, broad daylight. We heard this, furore outside in the park behind our house. And we looked out the window and there was a car flying around at this park, like handbrake turns, like, it's full of like, 12, 13 and 14-year-old kids that I was working with who had stolen this car. And they were ragging it round. And when they got bored of ragging it round, they just like left it with a brick on the accelerator, the engine revved until the car blew up. And then they just sat on a wall and watched this car burning until the fire engine came. And when the fire engine came, they started hurling bricks at the fire engine. And this was like broad daylight when they should have been in school. Like it was like school hours. And me and my wife were just like, what the heck is this place?
Yeah.
It was just like absolutely lawless at the time. I remember as well, like in that burnt out area with where there was just the A-frames of the swings, we asked for permission from the council to do Christmas carols every Christmas. And we get a big oil drum and set a fire in the oil drum and just gather around it with a guitar and sing carols and then try and preach the gospel to the local, and then loads of people would come, dozens, if not hundreds, would come and gather in this playground. But one night we'd done this carol service and we went home feeling pretty good about ourselves. And then there's a knock on the door very shortly afterwards. And two of the guys who had come to the carol service had then gone over to one of the flats next to the park and had got involved over a row over a can of Foster's. And one of them had taken out a knife and had literally sliced his knife through this guy's cheek. So you could see inside his face, and I had to take him to the hospital with his face hanging open. And it was just that kind of place, mate. It was just nuts. It was just, it was so wild back in those days.
So you had your work. Sorry, I was going to come in with a really cheesy pun. You had your work cut out there. Sorry.
Yeah, we did, man. It was, but I just think that they're the sorts of places where God wants his people, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? And I still think they're the most, I felt so close to God in those places because I genuinely so terrified.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to do the chronology. I think, was that when we met? I came to your house. Where was that? And how did we meet in general?
We met. No, you came to my house when I'd moved back to the Valleys. So after St. Mellons, I went back to the Valleys, my hometown, and planted a church way high on a council estate up in the Welsh Valleys, up in my hometown, Pontypool. And we connected, you and I. So the guy that I was leading the church with at the time had bought your book, Sacrifice, and had been really, really stirred by it and impacted by it. And I still think, like, to this day, books of that size. It's the best book of that size you could possibly give to
It's
anybody.
the shortest one I've written, isn't it? So that's the vision of it. It's 10,000 words, so it can be read in an hour.
Absolutely, but it was just a superb book, and I'm not just saying that to sort of like big you up on air or nothing, but it was just a really helpful book, and so we booked you to come and speak at our Cardiff our men's convention in Cwmbran, which is it's called Courageous, I think at the time, and so I think you even booked to come back from Africa, from Burundi, just to do that, and then use that as an excuse to go do some other ministry in other places after that. But like, it was just really humbling that you'd even come back from Burundi to come and visit us. And so I think that's when we first met. I guess we've been mates ever since, which has been a real blessing.
Yeah. So how long did you stay on that estate you're talking about with the burning car?
The burning car at St. Mellons, that was 6 years. And then Pontypool, Trafficking, which is where I then met you, that was another 9 years.
So reviewing that 6 years, do you what key life lessons? Was it encouraging overall?
I think, yes. I mean, it was overall. I think one of the key life lessons is this, like, hit and run evangelism just doesn't cut it in those sorts of communities. You've got to buy in. You have to move in. You have to buy in, and you have to dig into those communities. Yeah. And I think that those are really key. Like, just incarnational, being willing to not just visit, do a bit of token gesture ministry, and then leave. Retreat to the safety of your home, but be among those people. And like, we were surrounded by trouble, man. Like, I could spend this entire podcast giving you crazy stories from St. Mellons. I'll give you just one more, which gives you an idea about what this looked like. We had a family of alcoholics on one side of us, and then next door, but one on the other side, there was another family of alcoholics. And every Friday night, they would they'd go into one home or the other and drink vodka together until something exploded, and then they'd start fighting, and it would spill out into the street. And then we'd almost every weekend, sometimes several times on a weekend, we'd get a knock on our door at 3-4 a.m. from the children in those houses saying, "Can you come and break up the fight, please? Can you come and help us put our parents to bed, please?" And this one night, I remember really clearly, like, we could hear the guy next door beating his girlfriend. Like, we could hear her hitting her. We could hear her screaming. So me and my wife, who is, she's a wonderful woman, but she's very slight. She's she's not hench in any way. We ran into this, the front door was wide open, so we ran into this house, and I remember grabbing this guy and pulling him off his girlfriend, and he was steaming drunk, and she was like bloodied and crying, and I remember pulling him away and making sure she was okay. And as he lifted his fist to go back after her, I remember Michelle, my wife, standing in front of him. She just jumped in front of him, put her finger in his face, and she said, "Get back in Jesus' name."
Wow.
And the guy just completely stopped. Like, he calmed down completely. It was amazing.
Brilliant.
And then, we put them to bed. And then I remember, like, with these kids, we were pouring, like, their alcohol, their vodka down the sink. And one of the kids who was visiting, he was from another house just around the corner. He said to his friends, whose parents we just, put to bed, he said, "Boys, this is all wrong, innit? It should be our parents tipping our vodka down the sink at this stage of our lives, but we're doing it for them." Yeah. And but like, you don't get to do that sort of stuff if you're not living among them. You don't get to do that sort of stuff if you haven't, like, bought in. You know what I mean? And it sometimes felt like we were just too in the thick of it. But at the same time, I never learned to pray like that. I learned how to pray in the Spirit in those times. I learned how to cry out to God with with every ounce of energy, because oftentimes you felt you had nothing left apart from crying out to God for mercy.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to have people thinking, what on earth are you doing, having your fabulous wife, Michelle, and the kids, putting them through that? Was that irresponsible?
Well, I would say no, because I mean, this might sound like an outrageous statement as well, but I honestly think the safest place you can be is in the center of God's will.
Amen.
And so I think that, like, who am I to dictate what's safe, and who am I to say that a safe community, what would be better for my children to sort of see their parents crying out in prayer to God? And by the way, one of the families that used to fight, we've since seen come to Christ, be baptized, and is now a member of a local church. Like, so, like, our kids have seen all that kind of stuff. And, we want our kids to see that, to feel that, and not to necessarily feel that that's a calling on their life. And our children have, as they've grown up and have learned to articulate themselves better, we know it has come at a cost to them. Yeah. But at the same time, we don't think they resent God for that. And I also think that God has spared them a lot because, God has blessed, our obedience to his call on our lives. And a nice semi in a nice safe neighborhood doesn't guarantee that your children are going to thrive.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it took you to inner city and me to Burundi, and in both situations, I think, well, people have said to me, "You're so irresponsible, and what are you doing? And how about, looking after the people you're meant to?" And the bottom line, my answer is, look, we've got the choice in any situation to choose faith or fear. And I find that most people, even as followers of Jesus, they're shackled by fear, and fear motivates them. And it's our birthright to choose faith. And some of you need to hear that. Stop living shackled by fear. Choose faith.
Absolutely.
And you need faith in the suburbs, because you can be taken out so easily. They're much more easy to be taken out there than it is in inner city or in Burundi, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your story.
Well, I would say this just on that point. I think that it would have been irresponsible if God hadn't told us to do it.
Yeah.
Like, that's mad. But if God tells you to do something, it's irresponsible to disobey.
Yeah.
So back to my story. So we went back to Pontypool and planted the Hill City Church. It was the first time I'd ever planted a church. Had absolutely no idea how that was going to play out. But
started in your house, didn't it?
Yeah, started in my house, and I think that's where you came and visited us, actually.
Can I just say, because I had a weekend, I was at, and I don't think David Gobbett, pastor of...
I love Dave.
I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but that's a big, thriving, successful church, a great church. But my highlight that weekend, and I think we did other men's stuff, was house church in your house. And I remember crying at the sort of presence of God, because there was this Muslim refugee lady who'd been having a hell of a time, and it was just like, wow, this is community. This is so earthy. This is so real. There's so much brokenness and pain and vulnerability and openness here, and I can feel the presence of God here. It was just really beautiful.
Yeah, no, that was precious, and that wasn't the Valley's house. That was when we came back to the inner city. That was the church I'm now planting, which is Redeemer Church.
Okay,
but yeah, that was a really precious time, house church in when Redeemer Church first started. The Pontypool plant was also started as a house church, and that was that was a crazy time, mate, because I mean, I had no aspiration to be a pastor or a church planter at that time. I loved talking about Jesus, but then when I started seeing there was communities all over the UK, often in difficult places, rough places that people didn't really think, it was wise to live or it was good to raise a child there. But it started to bother me, like, if I go to these places and talk about Jesus or rant about Jesus, but there's no church there to receive and to disciple these people, then what's the point of that? Like, that's kind of unkind. Like, if there's no church there, start a church there, and create an environment where discipleship can take place. And so the Valley community, almost the kind of polar opposite of the inner city one that you came to visit. The Valley community was, almost all white, almost all Welsh, almost all fourth or fifth generation, Valley. And so it was a very kind of indigenous population. And again, I learned a lot living up there and serving up there. But it was in 2016 that my wife and I responded to God's calling on our life to come back to inner city Cardiff, this time to a place called Adamsdown, which is where I now live, and start Redeemer Church, which is the church that you came and minister to in that living room. And that that was and still is one of the craziest expressions of church that I've ever been able to be involved in. It's because it's a crazy diverse community. I remember, like, when we first moved into the house, Michelle, my wife, who I get all my best material from, she's a far more godly person than me. I remember, like, we parked our car outside the house one day, and we just moved there, and we could hear people shouting up and down the street and out of their windows in multiple different languages. We could hear, like, Eastern European languages and African dialect, and and also Cardiff dialects. And I remember Michelle just looked at me. She said, "Di, if we plant a church here and it ends up looking like us, we have totally failed to plant a church in this community. The church has to look like the community that you're trying to reach." And by the grace of God, that's how it's transpired.
Yeah, and I can tell you listeners, it is absolutely beautiful. Hi folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, it'd be great if you shared it with as many of your mates as possible so that other people get to hear about it. And listen, if you would like to support our work in Burundi, which is the hungriest country in the world, I'd love support there too. You can do that by going to greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. Now let's get back to the podcast. So where did Red Community and Manumit, is that about that time that came into being?
Yeah, similar. So like it was in 2012. I was up in Pontypool where God had first laid the issue of human trafficking on my heart, and like he did that through a quite spectacular Holy Spirit vision, which terrifies some people from my kind of theological tribe, but I just can't pretend it didn't happen. I had a crazy vision from God, which just blew me into a place where I had to respond with some kind of faith to the issue of modern slavery, sexual exploitation on the streets of Cardiff, and in the city of Cardiff. And it's probably too long to go into how that played out, but the issue became, until that point, I hadn't really known or cared about that issue. But then in 2012, God gripped me, and I remember thinking I got to do something about this, and I started a monthly prayer meeting in Cardiff to just invite people in to speak to me and other Christians who cared about justice, about issues of human trafficking and modern slavery, both locally and globally. And those prayer meetings grew. They were never hugely well attended, but they were certainly attended by enough people to get some momentum. And so throughout 2013, we were praying and seeking God, and this thing called Red Community, Red being short for redemption, started, which is essentially, it was just a prayer meeting. And I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned through all the ministries I've talked about on this podcast, and I could talk about for the rest of the podcast, is that prayer has to be the engine that is revving behind it all. And if there's no prayer, then everything else is just a token gesture. And certainly with the issue of like human trafficking and modern slavery, prayer just felt like it had to be the main ministry that we were doing. And so as we prayed, God started to sort of bring a bit more kind of vision and a bit more kind of shape to what we were doing. And Red Community became a charity. And then through that charity, we set up a couple of projects, the most significant one being a project called Embrace, which is it's a project where we get to befriend, we train up members of local churches in South Wales to befriend survivors of modern slavery as they seek to rebuild their lives in our local communities, mainly in Cardiff and Newport. And I think, to date, we've trained up something like 64 different, men and women to be befrienders. And, and they just seek to, I think they commit to 2 hours a week, every week, of just like friendship, going out for coffees, going out to cinemas, helping to fill out medical forms, school forms, whatever. And through that project, it became quite clear early on that one of the things that the women, especially who were trying to rebuild their lives after some horrendous exploitation, sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, they really wanted to get back into work. But the idea of a 9 to 5 in a normal workplace was just too daunting, too terrifying. And so we were asked if we would consider creating a working environment where we could have it as a stepping stone, where people who've been trafficked could rebuild their confidence, get some skills, and then, maybe put something on their CV to help them to get, move towards full-time employment. And that's where Manumit Coffee Roasters got born. Myself and one of the other trustees from Red Community, a guy called Nick, a really dear friend of mine. He agreed to take a punt on it with me. So we set up a separate business called Manumit, Manumit being a word that means to set free from slavery. And we set up a coffee business in Cardiff, just roasting coffee, employing a small number of survivors, and seeking to help coach them and support them as they sought to rebuild their lives. And, that's, gone from strength to strength ever since, by the grace of God.
Yeah, so how well is it doing now?
Well, I mean, it was going well anyway, but then when lockdown happened last year and, the coronavirus hit, I remember looking at all these predictions of coronavirus and thinking everyone's going to be laid off, everyone's going to lose their jobs, no one's going to buy our coffee, and woke up one morning with tears in my eyes. I think this is it. I think it's over. And who's going to buy specialty coffee, which, is more expensive than Tesco's coffee, with this coronavirus pandemic upon us. And almost overnight, our online sales tripled.
Wow.
So they tripled, and they've stayed tripled, and so we're now we're a not-for-profit business. And so we were committed to investing all of our profits in anti-slavery projects locally and globally. And the last year was the first year we had any profits to invest, because it'd been kind of hand to mouth until that point. But so it's done amazingly well on that level. That the quality of our coffee is getting better, the feedback we get is better. But the most important, obviously, we got more profits to invest. But the most important thing is that we are genuinely seeing, lives changed, the people who are helping, it's just been really beautiful to see, stories of redemption, stories of transformation.
Go on, give us some stories of redemption.
Well, I mean, I'll give you one. So the very first girl who worked for us, she was a victim of sexual exploitation. She'd been trafficked into prostitution out of Eastern Europe. Was very, very broken. Was very shy. Was very unsure. Very anxious. Had was certainly not employable, if I could say that kindly. But she was with us for 2 years. And over that time, we saw her really grow in confidence. We saw her really grow in hope. We saw her come to faith. We baptized her as a church. But also, she's now left us and has gone on, is now working as a full-time carer, 40 hours a week, got her own flat, and is doing really super well. So those sorts of stories are just precious. Do you know what I mean? And she's still a dear friend. Every week, at least, once or twice a week, she'll text my wife and say, what's for tea tonight, even though she's not invited.
So good.
Yeah,
May we be the kind of people that people invite themselves around to. That's what I say.
Amen. Absolutely. And interestingly, she used to live locally to us, and so she would have regularly invited herself in, but now she's moved to the other side of the city, so we don't see her as much anymore, which is a shame. But certainly, her life looks very different to what it did. And it's interesting as well, like, just one little story from the workplace, which I think will help you to understand the kind of the ethos and the gospel DNA of the workplace. We had this one moment quite early on where I asked her to do something. I don't know, maybe like, could you go and like, roast a coffee or something like that? And she just said to me, no. And there's this really sort of strange pause. And one of the there's a young guy who was helping us at the time, who's in the coffee industry and didn't really understand, the story of trafficking and stuff. He looked at me as if like, you're going to let her speak to you like that. And so I said to her, I said, well, actually, no, she said, no, you can't tell me what to do. And I kind of took a breath and I said, actually, I can tell you what to do because I'm your boss, but we can talk about that. I'm certainly not going to force you to do it, but as your boss, I am able to, give you an instruction in the workplace. And afterwards, this young man said to me, why did you let her get away with speaking to you like that? Like, she would have been sacked anywhere else. I said, because that's probably the first time she's had the personal agency to say no to a man. And I didn't want to crush that moment. I didn't want to sort of like come down hard and push back too hard. I actually wanted to like recognize that was growth. Yes, it needed to be managed. It wasn't allowed to be, that can't become the new norm where you tell the boss no. But in that moment, I was also a male that she had said no to. And I felt that was a really important thing for her, a really important moment for her. And that's the kind of, ethos we're trying to generally build these people up. And, she didn't tell me no too many times after that. But I just felt it was, that it was important to recognize that, that was significant, that she'd felt able to do that.
Yeah. So you're the kind of person that does 3-4 people's jobs at the same time. Last time I saw you, I'm guessing it was about a year ago when I was preaching your way. You seemed pretty burnt out. Were you overcooked, and did you have some time out after that?
Yeah, I think I was. I kind of almost certainly was burnt out, overcooked. I think I do struggle with the fact that I am my own worst enemy when it comes to the things that I do, because most normal people have a job, but when you have several jobs, they all feel manageable until one or two of the plates start spinning out of control. And then all of a sudden everything feels like, unmanageable. And I regularly go through periods where I feel completely out of my depth. I think last year during the coronavirus, probably in September, October, I probably had as close to a breakdown as I've ever had. Certainly I was not well. I didn't go to see the doctor, so I can't say I was clinically depressed, but I was probably just depressed. But I was certainly completely burnt out. I was having a lot of irrational thoughts, just like, I regularly want to quit. I regularly want to jack it all in. Just, I sometimes wonder what it might be like to just go to a church as a normal member rather than a pastor. I sometimes wonder what it would be like to just live in a normal area, not one where I'm surrounded by chaos. I sometimes have these kind of aspirations of a kind of a vanilla life.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you must have similar thoughts, mate.
I'm struggling against the vanilla life right now.
Yeah. And so, I think I've had many times where I've just ended up like, flinging myself on God. But over the years, I can honestly say that God has proved to me like that what he says in John 15 verse 5 is absolutely true, that apart from me, you can do nothing.
Mm.
And I really believe that. Like, I think I used to verbally assent to that as a truth. I think the older I'm getting, the more I'm realizing if there's anything good or glorious that comes out of my life, it's because God did it, Christ did it, because I can't, I'm so limited, man. And I'm so weak. And, I think I put it this way to a friend recently, that in my 20s, I honestly thought I could change the world for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
In my 30s, I would have been quite happy just to change Wales for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mid 40s now. I just want to make it to like heaven without like shipwrecking my faith or wrecking my marriage.
Yeah.
I just want to be a faithful husband and, not do anything to disqualify myself, and anything else. And hopefully all four of my children standing alongside me, bowing before the throne on that day. And anything beyond that is going to be grace. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, I think God in his kindness crushes us sometimes, because otherwise we just run away with ourselves and start to believe our own hype.
Yeah.
And there's only one who's worthy of hype, and it ain't me.
Mm. Yeah. So you talk about Michelle in glowing terms. I've got my Lizzie, you've got Michelle. Give us some sort of Michelle lessons to you and life wisdom for us.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that question. I mean, like literally so much about Michelle. Like the wisest thing that Michelle ever did was to never get involved in social media. So I really am jealous of the fact that she's not caught up in this kind of gurgling whirlpool of social media. She's the most humble and the most gentle and the most wise. And those people that they just do loads of stuff behind the scenes, but no one knows that they do it behind the scenes. But you just know that one day you're going to look across heaven and be like, why they got a fatter crown than me? and it's going to be because they just did all sorts without anybody needing to know about it. Like the way that she cares for the broken, the way that she sees people's emotional needs, she can clock it without a word being spoken across a crowded room. She just knows, and she'll know how to pursue them. She'll know how to just graciously, gently, and strategically, winsomely come alongside them. Her eye has always been on the marginalized. Her eye has always been for the forgotten. And there are some people who I think, are high maintenance in church, and she just seems to have a patience and a way with them, which reminds me a lot of Jesus. Her life really reminds me a lot of Jesus, and the way that she mothers our children. Like, and this isn't me just sort of like, saying this now. If my kids turn out good, it'll have a lot more to do with the grace of God and my wife's input in their life than mine. I'm sure I got a part to play, but I could not wish for a better mother for my children than the one that God has blessed me with. She's just a phenomenal woman, and infinitely better, better human being, and far better Christian than me, and never fights for the limelight, man. That's a beautiful thing.
Well, Michelle, we salute you, seriously. And you talked about wanting to jack it in a few minutes back. So why do you think you've managed, and how have you managed to not yet jack it in?
Do I mean, the kind of Christian answer is, God. Like, I think he stopped me doing it. I've had moments where I genuinely have been so close to making a phone call, or so close to writing an email, or so close to making a public declaration on Twitter, and oh God alone knows how close I got. I remember this one time when I was up in Pontypool. I was in a really dark season, and I was really troubled with some of the stuff that's going on pastorally. And I remember lying in bed one morning, and I didn't want to get out of bed. Like, I had this really overwhelming sense of just stay there, just lie there. So I was just lying there. I don't know if I was in the fetal position. That might make it a bit more Hollywood, but certainly I was just lying in bed, and I had absolutely no intention of getting up out of bed that day, and I just felt defeated. I felt absolutely done, and I remember almost feeling like, again, this might sound crazy to some of the more kind of like cessationist kind of people that might be listening, but it's almost like I could feel like Satan draw a circle around me with his finger, and I was lying in this circle. I almost felt him say, "Stay there," and I just lay there, cold. I lay there, scared. Lay there in my mind. I was writing a resignation letter to the church. I was saying, "Guys, this is why I just can't do it anymore. This is, I'm done." I've got nothing left. This is all this, and I just wrote this letter in my head. And then I just felt, and this is a weird thing, but I don't think you'll find it weird. I just felt the Spirit say to me, read 1 Peter chapter 5. So I opened up my Bible to 1 Peter chapter 5, and this is what it says. So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. And I remember like the thing which really struck me as the Lord spoke to me through his word that morning was Peter wrote to me as a fellow elder, as a fellow shepherd. I almost felt like God, the Spirit say through Peter, I get it. So like from one burnt out, knackered, fallen, fallible shepherd to another, just shepherd the sheep that are there. Sometimes there's, where, especially if we're shepherds with a more evangelistic bent, which I know you've got and I certainly got, we're often more concerned for the ones who aren't there than the ones who are. And I think at the time I was probably really burdened about a situation where people were like, either, outside of the church or like left the church or something like that. But I just felt that Peter said, I felt like the Spirit put his arm on my shoulder through the Apostle Peter and said, I understand, but just keep going, shepherd those who are there, do it gladly, do it willingly. And there's a crown waiting for you at the other end. And it gave me so much grace, man. Like God's word is just absolutely lock and loaded full of nuggets that give us hope and perspective. And the Spirit knows when to pull the trigger. Like the Spirit knows when we need to read something or we need to hear a sermon preached or like, and you've had this. I bet you could do a podcast of just your own experiences where at just the right moment, God gives you a word in season and it just does more in a moment than a million podcasts or a million pep talks ever could. Do you know what I mean? And so often it's the word of God. Another thing that God has really graced me with is, there are good people in my life. I know the church gets a lot of bad press at the moment and everybody wants to hate on the church. And, they're essentially saying, Jesus, we love you, but your bride's a minger. Can we just have you and forget the church? But my experience of the church, even with all her faults and with all her failures, there's always been men and women, brothers and sisters in my life who God has used either in my local church, but also just in the kind of wider church, just friends, people, often older seasoned saints who have just like gone ahead and they've just been able to come alongside at just the right time and spoken the right word to me. And it's interesting as well, mate. And again, you must have had this in Burundi. Sometimes the most helpful ministry you receive isn't from a wiser or a more mature saint. It's from a young, immature, new believer or even not yet believer who just sees you're not doing well and comes and ministers some kind of grace to you, which in that moment is just so precious because of who's given it. I remember there was one really troubled guy off the estate up in Pontypool where he'd literally just come to Christ. He was like so full of like, he had so many issues, man, so much baggage, and he was in many ways, he was a real difficult person to pastor. But this one morning, I remember I was preaching one Sunday morning, and before I preached, I was just sat in my chair crying. And he just came over and just put his hand on my shoulder and just prayed for me. And I just remember thinking, that's the most precious prayer that I ever could have received. Like, that was more precious than my mum. If my mum had come back from the dead and prayed for me, do you know what I mean? Like that was just so timely. So the word of God and the people of God, I think, are just a means of grace to us. And Christians often find themselves losing hope and tapping out when their Bible's gathered dust and they've decided to, for whatever reason, forsake the church and forsake other Christians because they think it's just them and Jesus is okay. Like, I would just encourage anybody listening to this, just get in the daily habit of reading the Bible, because one day you're going to open that word and it's going to give you this nugget, which is going to do you so much good. But if you're not in the daily habit and the daily discipline of reading that word, you might actually miss the medicine that your heart is crying out for.
Yeah. I don't want to stop. I mean, time has flown, mate. Do you want any last nugget before we go? And do you want to just mention the things that people can track you with?
Well, maybe I'll mention the things, and then if there's any nuggets, as I'm mentioning the things, then then that's probably the best. I would probably just say, I am on Twitter still. It's the only social media that I'm still on. So if anybody wants to connect with me on social media, Twitter is the only place. And because I got a stupid name, Hankey, DaiHankey. That's just my Twitter handle, @DaiHankey, all one word. The coffee, I think people often like to sort of know a bit about that. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter, and also our website at mannymickcoffee.co.uk. And our church, I can't remember our church's website address, man. I think it's redeemer.org.uk. I think not that there's anything particularly glamorous about that website. We've purposely tried to keep our website really kind of tame because it stops church hoppers turning up, and we just invite people in instead, rather than trying to have a glamorous website. So there's not a lot going on with our website, but the other stuff you might find a bit helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just with regards to the nugget, mate, if I could leave a nugget with anybody, I think it would just be this. Like, just there's a verse in James 4 verse 6 that I think probably is the verse which has helped me most through the difficult seasons of my life and helped me to make sense of them as well. But I think it's just the most helpful verse for all Christians who are trying to navigate this crazy season that we're all living through right now. And that is James 4 verse 6, that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And just to put Christ first and to embrace anything that causes you to suffer, embrace anything that causes you to struggle. Because it's in those moments, I think, where we're forced, am I going to throw myself on Christ? Am I going to find him to be sufficient? And we will find his grace is sufficient for us. So rather than resisting and resenting those things, receiving them as God's loving discipline and allowing ourselves to receive his grace as he humbles us. Because let's be honest, none of us have a right to swagger into his presence, do we? So that'd be my final nugget, really.
Thanks, Di. It's been great to have you, mate. Seriously, God bless you so much and the whole family in your work.
Bless you, mate.
Listen, folks, that's it from us this week. If you've enjoyed it, then please give us a great review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this. Please gossip the podcast in terms of sharing it with people that you think will benefit. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Adam Thomas Steers for the editing and Mike Sandeman for the mixing. And next week, we've got another superb guest, so we'll see you then. Toodaloo.